National Library of Scotland. So a very warm welcome to all of you who are here and to all of you who are watching this being streamed live from wherever you are. My name is Colin McElroy. I am the Curator of Modern Literary Archives here at the National Library. I'm delighted to welcome back to the library Sir Ian Rankin to talk about his new book, Heart Full of Headstones, and a few other subjects, which I hope we can get into as well. In the very unlikely case that anyone in the audience here or online doesn't know about Ian, Ian Rankin is best known as the author of the Rebus series of novels, of which this is number 24 in the Rebus series. You've published over 30 books under Jack Harvey and your own name. He sold tens of millions of copies worldwide. Been translated into 35 languages. We can't list all the awards you've won. They take up too much time. We can't list all the honorary degrees that you've received. That would probably take up a lot of time as well. And in addition to writing the Rebus novels and the other material for which he's well known, he's written drama, TV, radio material, an opera libretto. He collaborated on a graphic novel. Where Ian finds the time and energy, who knows, perhaps you can tell us that as part of the evening. Ian's also been a great friend to the National Library, helping us to raise funds to finish off buying the Muriel Spark archive, and in 2019 he donated his own archive to the library, which he described as a pretty complete author's life, late 20th century style. Ian also very kindly helped fund the project Curator Post, so that you can now go on our website and search the list created by Rosemary, who's here tonight. And of course you can come to the library and consult Ian's archive in person. Can we have a nice warm welcome for Ian Rankin? Before we get to the book, I understand you have been busy promoting the novel. Where have you been of late? How has the promotion tour been, and how has the book been received?
Well, the book's been very well received, hurrah. Still in the top 10 in the UK, still in the top 10 in Canada. I did a UK tour in Ireland, I did Dublin, and then I did Canada most recently, and I'm heading off to New York next Wednesday to do the Cheltenham Literature Festival at sea. On a boat. They fly you to New York and then you sail back. Lots of authors on a ship. What could possibly go wrong? Why would you invite a crime writer along? I don't know. Actually, 2 crime writers, because Sandy McCall-Smith's going as well. So that'll be fun. I've not seen Sandy for donkeys. And Mary Beard's going to be there, and a few other folk. So,
have you done something like this before?
No. It'll be. I mean, you know, it's bloody winter crossing the Atlantic. You're not going to be out on deck much, I suppose.
No, I can't imagine. Have you found over the last couple of years, is it good then to travel and whatnot and get away, or are you just glad to get back home?
As I get older, it gets harder. This jet lag gets harder. You're not as excited about visiting new places. So sometimes they're not new places anymore. You're visiting for the 3rd or 4th or 5th time, and you're going to be there for a single day. I mean, Canada was 5 cities in 6 days, so you don't really get to see anything. You're just working. And they're long days, and I'm knackered at the end of it, so it's quite nice to get home again. And it's a kind of weird Jekyll and Hyde existence where you spend half your time in complete isolation writing a book, no company except yourself, and then you've got to go out and be a door-to-door salesman, basically, going around with your briefcase full of Beck's Bissell, cleaning things. The guy used to come round your door when I was wee. He'd come round, Mum would look at all these, I'll have some towels and I'll have some floor polish. It's kind of, writers don't become writers because they're gregarious, outgoing people. We're the kind of shy kids at school. It's what we tend to be. So it took a bit getting used to actually being out on the road. And standing up and talking, I mean, this is okay, this is fine, but sometimes you have to stand up and just talk for an hour in front of an audience. I mean, nothing's happened to me in the preceding year, except I've written a book. So I mean, I was in St Andrews last Saturday, and I said, "You saw me for the McIlvanney book. Here I am back again. I've done hee-haw, except write this book. I've got to talk for an hour."
Well, don't worry, we won't demand that. But it's interesting that because obviously you worked on The Dark Remains, finished that, and then A Song from the Dark Times, and then now with A Heart Full of Headstones. It looks like you've had a really busy sort of pandemic or lockdown or that kind of period.
Yeah, it was crazy busy, but that was good. It was good to stay busy. It was like an escape from Camp COVID. I could tunnel out every day by writing books that had nothing to do with COVID. So the previous Rebus book was written during COVID. And then the McIlvanney project came up, and I did that during COVID. Then I did Murder Island, the game show on TV was done during COVID. And then I wrote a Rebus stage play, which is hopefully going to be touring next year during COVID. And did a wee monologue for Rebus that Brian Cox did for the National Theatre of Scotland. So yeah, it was busy, but it was a way of dealing with, or not dealing with, or not thinking about COVID.
Right. So did you do all the promotion online and whatnot?
All online, Zoom. I mean, I you know, my laptop uses coal. I mean, you know, I've had it for donkey's years. I've had the screen replaced, I've had the hard drive replaced, but I just keep it because it's my lucky laptop. The BBC would have me on and they would say, "Ian, you look like a ghost," because I've got the cheapest camera fitted to it that you could possibly have. You know, the camera that's part of it. So I had to buy a kind of camera and a ring light and everything, and you had to buy a decent microphone, and you had to learn what Zoom was, and you're doing all of that. And it was a novelty, and it was a way of making sure that readers could still access you. But all these Zoom festivals and things, problem was you didn't sell any books at the end of it, because there's not a queue of folk. You're sitting at home in your jammies. There's not a queue of folk waiting there wanting to get a book signed. So it's quite nice to get back out on the road again and actually talk to fans and get feedback about what they like and what they don't like. And, you know, people whose dog is called Rebus. Lots of questions about Brillo the dog and I mean all that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask you a couple of things about this. It's utterly compelling, brilliant as ever. There's a really kind of interesting aspect I found interesting, which was that the way that you've got Rebus and Big Ger Cafferty trying to kind of deal with their ageing, their diminishing health, possibly their diminishing power in both the kind of areas that they work in. And one of the narrative threads early in the book is that they come to a kind of arrangement of sorts. So it kind of deals with that kind of moral ambiguity that's been a feature throughout the Rebus books. And you know, and things like the TV show The Wire get great credit for it, and I think perhaps you deserve more credit for that. I'm wondering, do you kind of think of that kind of moral ambiguity as simply, you know, realism, a reflection of the society that these characters work in, as it actually is, or is there something else going on?
Well, this book started life with a lot of instances of corruption in the real police forces in the UK, specifically in the Metropolitan Police in London. You know, you had a badge-carrying cop who managed to persuade a woman into his car and he raped and murdered her. And it came to light that he had been a bad cop for many years. He had done many bad things and it had been covered up by his mates, because that's the way it is. It's us and them. And you become a team, you become a gang. And the same thing happened again not long afterwards, where two women were murdered in a park in London, and the cops guarding the murder scene were taking selfies with the bodies and posting them on WhatsApp groups and having a laugh with their mates. And it just keeps on coming out. There was just a few weeks ago, there was a story in the Sunday Times about a Welsh police officer who committed suicide, I think, and his family found his telephones, his mobile phones, and on them there were all kinds of racist comments and sexist comments and you know, just joshing with his mates in the police. In a way that, you know, just isn't acceptable and probably never should have been acceptable. But I think we thought that the police had cleaned up their act to a certain extent, that it wasn't the way it was in the 70s when you had the Sweeney beating up suspects in the interview room. That couldn't happen anymore because we've all got CCTV and everything's monitored and everybody's got phones so they can actually catch the police if they're doing something bad on the streets. Hence the Black Lives Matter campaign in America, where actually the video was what got that started. The fact that the guy was videoed as he was being murdered on the street. all of that was kind of swirling around in my head, and it got me thinking of Rebus and the fact that he has done some pretty bad things in his time, but he would always think of himself as an angel with a dirty face. He was doing it for the right reasons. He might have got dirty in the process, but he was doing it to get the right result. I just thought, but yeah, that's your defence, but is that a real defence? Yeah. And it gets complicated because it seems to me that the public sometimes want the bad cops. They want the mavericks. So you know when that TV show Life on Mars was on, and it was about a modern day touchy-feely liberal cop who goes back in time to the 70s and basically ends up in the Sweeney. I think we were supposed to side with him, Sam Tyler, against Gene Hunt and all these kind of boorish, thuggish Neanderthal cops. But no, everybody loved Gene Hunt. Gene Hunt got the second and third seasons because people just went for him because they like a bad boy and they like a maverick. Yeah. And so in this book, although I do have bad cops in this book, I have quite a lot of bad cops in this book, Rebus being implicated all along the way. I do try for nuance. I try to say, look, there's one scene I'm really proud of. I'm not going to say much about it. It's near the end of the book. But there's a bad cop, and he's trying to arrest a guy who's off his head and who's been assaulting people around Haymarket. And he takes the guy down, and all the members of the public are just standing around getting it on their phones. Nobody is helping him at all. And I just thought, yeah, you know, that's the job you do. You're the kind of thin blue line. And so although you are a bad cop, sometimes you're doing the right thing.
Do you ever go? You have friends in the police. Do you ever get any comments from them when you're writing? I mean, this isn't the first sort of book where you dealt with police corruption. Do you ever get any feedback from them?
I had an ex-cop who read the book and sent me a text and went, "Oh, aye." He said, "Who told you that story?" And is it that, you know, your fictional police station? Oh, I know where that is. I know which police station you're talking about. So it's like this stuff has gone on, and retired cops are fairly open to telling me stories. Serving detectives, not so much. And I'm not in bed with the police. I mean, some crime writers do try and get very close to the police, but I do an absolute minimum that I need, because I don't want the books to become PR exercises. I want to feel able to write about bent cops and bad cops. And also, I don't like doing research. No, honestly, for this book, most of my books, all of my books up until now, the story ends before the court case, because I have absolutely no idea what happens in a courtroom. This book, there had to be a court case. And so I got in touch with a friendly QC, now a KC, and I said, look, can you take a look at these sections and just make sure I've got the wording right and the ambience of the courtroom and everything. And the reason I wanted court scenes in the book was that during COVID, my son was on a jury in Edinburgh, and it was just absolutely fascinating to me what he told me. He couldn't tell me much, but what he told me was they were all in the Odeon cinema on Lothian Road while the trial was taking place in the High Court. And it was just all video screens and microphones. The accused and the judges and that could see the jury could see the accused and the judges and that. And I just thought I've seen a lot of courtroom scenes, I've read a lot of courtroom dramas, but I've never seen something set during COVID. It's just a really strange and quite beguiling sort of scenario. Yeah. So I decided that I would have to have, well, Rebus is on trial at the start of the book, and then we go back in time to find out why he's on trial. So this is my first time in a courtroom. I needed it. And the other thing was I decided it would be set during a time of COVID, partly because I could use that courtroom scene, but also because I wanted Rebus to have a lanyard with a laminated card at the end of it saying that because he's got COPD, he's exempt from wearing a mask indoors. And I thought, if he's got a lanyard and a laminated card, he's going to use that to try and get into police stations and crime scenes and everything else. So you can have a bit of fun with that.
Which you have him do particularly skillfully. It's like, how did he manage to get his way into Leith Police Station?
Yeah. Brilliant. It's getting harder. I mean, you've already flagged up that he's now been retired for quite a long time, and he doesn't know the people in the police station anymore. He doesn't know the people in the front desk anymore. So he doesn't automatically get through the door. Yeah. And he sometimes has to fight hard to do it. Yeah. And I like that. It's a challenge, but I quite like a challenge. I think the retirement books have been some of my favourite books. Yeah, yeah. Because as you've pointed out, he's getting older, Cafferty's getting older, they're getting creakier. Yeah. They ache in the places where they used to play. And I think that's a really interesting process. Both of these men are asking themselves, do I still matter? Do I still make a difference? Do I still have a role to play?
It's like the kind of sparring that goes on always becomes more sort of cerebral because the physical threat isn't what it used to be. And it's, the mind games are getting even deeper and more convoluted. It's brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, Rebus can't get in fights anymore. He would lose, and that would be injurious to his his kind of sense of himself. So he tends not to get in fights. I think in this book he almost gets in a fight with Malcolm Fox, and Fox says, "Really?"
Yeah.
But yeah, he can't even climb a flight of stairs. God bless him. I had to move him to a ground floor flat because COPD. 2 flights of stairs is just too much. But luckily there was a ground floor flat for sale in Arden Street at the time when I made that decision, so I thought, right, it is realistic that he could have bought the ground floor flat and just moved everything down there, Of course the ground floor flats are smaller than the upstairs flats, so then you've got to get rid of some of your stuff. So he's had to scour it, he's had to clear it. This is, I do research. What am I saying? I don't do research. In this book, actually, I tell you, so it happened, because I decided, the first draft is written before the research is done. So I wrote the first draft, and I thought, right, I need to go and check out this place, that place, this place, that place. And I'm walking down Leith Walk to go to Constitution Street, which is where a crime has happened. And of course, Constitution Street's completely dug up for tramworks, and you can't access it. So I thought, well, no police car can get near here, no scene of crimes officers can park up here. What do I move the crime to somewhere else, or do I just work with that? And I decided I would just work with that. Just laziness, really, rather than moving it somewhere else. But I had that all the time. I would say, right, so Siobhan Clarke drives down the bridges. Oh, hang on a minute, can she drive south? Yes, she can. She can't drive north, but she can drive south. Can she turn into Canongate? I checked that out. At the time when the book is set, no, she couldn't. It was blocked off at the top of the Canongate. You've got to go down the Cowgate and back up again. That is all absolutely accurate. I've had nobody complain so far about inaccuracies in the book.
You mentioned about the sort of reader or our preference for the Mavericks and the bad guys and whatnot. I must admit, you've got Rebus in this book trying to eat and drink healthily. I was cheering when he poured his first whiskey.
Yeah, I know.
It's because it's almost like that's when the business stuff starts to happen. When he puts on the record, pours a whiskey, you know that he's really engaged and thinking.
Yeah, he's had to stop smoking because you can't smoke if you've got COPD.
Yeah.
He's trying to eat a bit more healthily because of the COPD, and he's kind of cut back on his drinking, big time. This is all my wife's fault. No, it is. It's all my wife's fault. She said to me quite a few years ago now. No, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. She said, "Look, Rebus's lifestyle and his age, something must happen to him. Yeah. He can't keep going like this." Yeah. And she's got a friend who's a GP, used to be a GP in Edinburgh. So I said to her, I said, "Look, if Rebus walked into your office, your practice, what would you expect him to present with?" And she gave me some pretty grueling and gruesome things that he could have. But then she mentioned COPD, and I went, it's got the word cop in it. That's perfect. So I just liked the fact that it had the word cop in it. So I thought I'll give him COPD, which is meant during lockdown he was having to be really, really careful. He was basically shielding. So Siobhan had to take his dog for a walk and stuff. He wasn't allowed out. Yeah. She was leaving messages at his door, and he couldn't buy any records. Neither could I. It's tragic. I know.
You mentioned Siobhan. In this book, a number of the female characters are sort of in the ascendancy, where the men, as we've talked about, the kind of older men are struggling to hold on to their power. Are you reflecting on a kind of change in gender balance in wider society in terms of positions of power or whatnot, or are these more so sort of character developments at the service of the narrative, or both? Or?
I think if you go back into my books, early books, I wasn't confident about writing from a woman's point of view, so there weren't many women characters in my books. And then I introduced Siobhan because I decided Rebus did need a sidekick. And women police officers and women crime writers said, "Oh, I like her, she's a good character." So I got a bit more confident. So there's that. I feel a bit more confident about using women as characters in the book. But also, in the police, there's been a huge upsurge in senior positions being filled by women. I mean, there used to be a huge glass ceiling I mean, there wasn't a female chief constable in Scotland until the 2000s, I think. Not long before it went to one police force. It was Fife, I think, if memory serves. So yeah, there's that. And yeah, I think there's lots of reasons for doing it. Male writers can have this problem where they go, I need to find out what's going on with tights. Or, you know, and honestly, there's one crime writer years ago, and I read his book and I thought, oh Christ, you actually put on a pair of tights to see what it was like. And he spent about 3 pages about his character putting on a pair of tights. And I don't know, I'm not going to do that. Nobody goes to the toilet in my books. Nobody has sex. The violence is minimal these days compared to the past. Again, partly because Rebus isn't a cop, so he's not dealing with violent situations per se. And Cafferty is past the point where he could physically intimidate. And Rebus is past the point where he could physically intimidate, which again is part of that little power play between them. It's like they're sitting over a chessboard, whereas once upon a time there'd been a boxing ring.
I was thinking about, in the novel, there's sort of possible hinted at major developments for Siobhan, and but what's interesting is that you kept Siobhan and obviously Rebus when he was in the force as, you know, very much, you know, not getting promotions and being at the street, and it seemed perhaps that's where the action is, that's where they had to be. But was part of this kind of, was it anything to do with the idea that we might root for the underdog? Or that when you go further up the chain of command in the police, you get further removed from what's actually happening in the streets.
I mean, when you get to Chief Inspector Morse, or whatever it was, Chief Superintendent Morse in Colin Dexter's books, he would not be doing interviews and chasing suspects. He'd be sitting behind a desk, calculating the cost of this investigation, and doing interviews with the media as a kind of, figurehead. So I thought, I don't want Rebus to get to a position where he's going to be a figurehead and he can't be on the streets pounding the beat. And same for Siobhan. Fox, different character. Fox, I could take him to a pen pusher's position because that's where he's best suited. He's not a man of action and never will be, although he's tried in the past with calamitous results. So he's happy being a pen pusher these days. I quite like him. A lot of people don't like Fox because he is like the anti-Rebus, or he's always trying to bring Rebus down. But you need that. You need the kind of thesis and antithesis. You need somebody who's trying to bring your main character down, and sometimes with good reason, because he worked internal affairs for a long time, and he knows what Rebus did, and he knows what Rebus got away with in the days before all this stuff was captured on film and camera phones.
Any plans on going back and writing something, Malcolm Fox, a single standalone, or?
No.
No,
what I would like to do, and I don't know if I ever will, but I would like, for a few years now, I've really wanted to do a standalone Siobhan book. I've just never found the plot. I've never found, how it works is I get a theme I want to write about, so police corruption and stuff in this one, and what corruption does to societies and to individuals. A plot that allows me to investigate that question, and then which characters are best suited to tell that story. And I've never found a theme and a plot where Siobhan was the answer. I would love to. But it hasn't happened yet. It doesn't mean to say it won't happen, although I'm slowing down mightily. So maybe I'll never get round to it.
In terms of
I've only got one more book to write in my contract. Yeah. And it won't be next year either.
Well, don't scare us.
No, I know, but I'm taking next year off, so the next book will be written and published in 2024, if the good Lord spares me. And I've not decided what I'm going to do yet. Well, the thing is, I've got my phone with me when we go on all these lovely holidays we're taking next year. But when I've got my phone with me, the temptation is if I get an idea is just to type it in. That's how this book was written. This book, I was actually desperate. I was panicking because from August last year, I thought, right, I better start a new book. It's got to be done and dusted by June this year. Couldn't find anything. I couldn't get the plot, the theme, anything. And then we were on holiday in January this year in St. Lucia, lovely. And the idea just started to come. And I'd get my phone out and just type it in. If it was a note, if it was a line, if it was a sentence, if it was a scene, if it was a character, if it was a plot development, I just typed it in as a wee note to myself. Got back to Edinburgh and just sat and typed that all up. And I went, there's a story here, there's a spine of a story.
Yeah. No, I was just saying thank goodness, because if hopefully we get the rest of your archive, then if it was all on your phone,
It'll be the phones, yeah. Well, don't worry, I've kept all my phones. I'll have to give you the passwords, but I've kept all my phones.
Well, speaking of tech and speaking of, in this book, there's the online blog or publication, The Current, and that's a sort of brilliant addition because it's, things that can be published about the criminal underworld and the happenings that maybe the mainstream press wouldn't be in a position to actually. Yeah. Yes. Where did that come from? Where did the idea for that come from? And is there?
I mean, the media always feature in my books because there's a kind of nice symbiotic relationship between them and the police, and I do like the character of Laura Smith. She's a real person. She lives in Ottawa. She paid money to charity to be in one of my books. She's been in about the last 10 books. I like her as a character, but I thought poor Laura, she's working for print media at a time when print media is dying on its arse. And I thought, she's like the crime correspondent, but eventually she knows they're going to sack her. They're going to make her redundant, like every other journalist. So she's desperate for a way of getting income, and a blog. An anonymous blog is her way of doing it. So mostly what she's doing is what I think a lot of journalists would think about doing, to remain journalists. And yes, the anonymity means that she is freer to write about things and to get things wrong and to speculate in a way that wouldn't be allowed in print journalism. And that's quite fun as well, when the baddies start to realise who the anonymous blogger is. I was in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago, and I was hoping to see Laura Smith, but she was away, because I was going to say to her, some terrible things happen in this book. I hope you're all right with that when you come to them. But I don't think she's read it yet, but she will. There's loads of real people in these books. I love doing that. Haj Atwal, the crime scene officer, he runs the Subway sandwich franchise in Scotland. He's a real person. He paid at a charity dinner to be in the books. And he's just a great character, having somebody who's in charge of crime scenes, just great. So, and it's lovely because he buys 20 copies for Christmas presents. So I've got a solid sale whenever I put him in a book.
It was intriguing. You mentioned a previous answer that one of your police friends knew which station you were talking about, but it was interesting that you kind of started using real stations. I mean, Leith Station and whatnot's in this as well. But Tynecastle, can we infer from that you're a Hibs fan, or is there something else going on?
No, I mean, Tynecastle, completely fictitious police station, because I didn't want to have endemic corruption, decades old, going on in a real police station, where real honest cops are working. So I decided, and I just looked at where the police stations are in Edinburgh, and I thought, Tynecastle's not a bad shout. There isn't one within very easy reach of it. No, it's not a Hibs Hearts thing at all.
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah. Tynecastle. I mean, it was. I could have made it Easter Road, I suppose. But then, it's very close to Leith. I mean, it's walking distance to Leith Police Station, and I already had Constitution Street, which is also walking distance to Leith Police Station. So I wanted to spread out a wee bit. And it is on the way to a really dodgy part of town, which again is completely fictitious. Not far off Calder Road, but completely fictitious. So that's why I chose it. Nothing to do with Hearts and Hibs. I always get in trouble with Hearts and Hibs. Always. People say, you Hearts or Hibs? And I'm Wraith Rovers. It's the only answer, really. On the TV, the Ken Stott ones, they made him a Hibs fan. Ken's a lifelong Hearts supporter. And that's the only reason he did it. Literally, the only reason he did it was to have a laugh at Ken's expense, so they could film him with a Hibs scarf on, going into the stadium and coming out again.
Well, on that point, I think, as ever, I don't think you get enough credit for the humour in the books. I mean, you were talking earlier on about Rebus not quite managing to stand up for himself the way he used to, and he ends up with, on the receiving end, and his reaction isn't what's happened to him regarding, they beat me up. It's like a colleague didn't even say anything about my face. Yeah. It's like they're overlooking it. It's this really kind of dry sort of sense of humour that's brilliant.
There's always got to be a bit of humour, isn't there? I mean, in Shakespearean tragedy, there's always a little bit of humour. You've got to have Yorick. It can't all be tragedy all the time. And the police have got a great sense of humour. Dark. And people who work in similar jobs have got a dark sense of humour. So of course it's there. And Scots have got a great dark sense of humour. I mean, these books are very Scottish, I think. I mean, they come from the Gothic, they come from Jekyll and Hyde and Justified Sinner, and as we're going to talk about, maybe Muriel Spark. But I think they are part of a continuum that looks at the kind of the darkness implicit in the soul of Scotland, and the fact that we are split personalities.
Yeah. Well, on that, in terms of Spark, I just wanted to ask you. We know you're a fan. We know that you were working on your PhD and whatnot. But in terms of your actual writing, how does her writing influence your writing?
I mean, I think the big thing she did for me was she took me to Jekyll and Hyde. So I was doing my PhD, and you've got Miss Jean Brodie, and Miss Jean Brodie tells us she's descended from William Brodie. She says he's a gentleman of Edinburgh. She doesn't say he was actually hanged on his own scaffold that he built for breaking into people's houses and hitting them over the head. But that was an influence on Stevenson, one of many influences on Stevenson when he came to write Jekyll and Hyde, was this person who is good on the surface but bad underneath. Stevenson had a wardrobe in his bedroom that had been made by Deacon William Brodie, and his nursemaid told him the story of Brodie, and that is now in the Writers' Museum. You can go and see it. And if you're lucky, they'll unlock it and open it up, and the story of Deacon Brodie is on the inside. So she did that for me. I think that's the main thing. Concision, I think, although I write long books, I always look at what can I leave out. And Spark wrote as a poet. She had a poet's way of working and a poet's imagination, and which is why her best books are her shortest books, I think. So concision is everything. Trust the reader. You don't have to spell everything out to the reader. And just that sense of Scottishness, of that kind of dark Gothic imagination. And she was influenced by the Border Ballads, so that took me back to the Border Ballads, which took me then to Hogg, because James Hogg collected Border Ballads for Walter Scott. And Hogg's Justified Sinner is the first serial killer novel that I can think of in history, and it's an extraordinary book. So, as I said at the start, it's a continuum. And when she died and we did a documentary about her for Sky Arts, it was a real privilege to get to visit the cemetery where she was buried, talk to her old friends, go to her old school, which is now a student hall residence, and look at some of her material. And of course, I've seen some of her material here, Muriel Spark Archive. I've been allowed to pick up one of the Thinn's jotters, James Thinn's jotters. She wrote all her books. All her books are written in James Thinn's jotters. So much so that when they stopped making them, she was horrified, and they went and sourced the card covers of the same colour and the paper of the same quality, and they made some up specially for her and sent her a batch of 30 or 40, I think, so that she could keep writing. It's extraordinary. All her books written in longhand in James Thinn's jotters. So wherever she was in the world, and she didn't spend much time in Scotland, but wherever she was in the world, she took Scotland with her.
So am I clutching at straws to think that maybe this book, with its kind of non-chronological approach, it's not the same as the way Spark uses non-chronology in like The Driver's Seat or The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie? Is that those kind of influences, or is it?
I don't think so.
No.
I think it was just I wanted to start with a bang, and the bang was going to be Rebus on trial.
Yeah.
But then I had to go back to explain what's going on, and then come back up to date at the end when we see why he's on trial.
Right.
I think that's why I did it. I mean, it's an old trick that many writers have used. No, it's not. Funny, I was just looking at the archive, the little exhibition, and there's some of my index cards from when I was doing my Spark thesis. And one of the cards is kind of just poking out at an angle from behind another card, and I could see R.O. or Alan, and I thought, oh, that's Alan Robbe-Grillet. Right. I could bet you £1,000 that on that card is Alan Robbe-Grillet's name, because she was influenced by the Nouveau Roman. Yeah. I don't think I've been influenced by the Nouveau Roman in any way. And I don't think I write experimental novels. I do think her best fiction could be described as experimental.
Yeah.
Or modernist.
Yeah. So things like with the Justified Sinner, with that kind of framed narrative where we get those types of things aren't necessarily influences on the techniques that you use, but it's more to do with the actual sort of atmosphere.
And the texture, the themes, the darkness at the heart of man, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, Justified Sinner is extraordinary in a way. I mean, a young man who's a religious zealot who is persuaded by a charismatic stranger that it's okay to bump people off because he's going to go to heaven anyway. So he starts doing it. Yeah. And you go, hang on a minute, who's this charismatic stranger? Yeah. Is he a psychopath? Is he the devil? Is he a figment of this man's fevered imagination? And it's never explained. Yeah. It's left open to the reader to decide. It's an extraordinary. Some people don't think Hogg wrote it. Because it's so unlike anything else he did. They think it's maybe somebody else. I don't think that's true, but it's just, I had a kind of fever dream, almost like Stevenson doing Jekyll and Hyde. It's almost like he wrote it in a fever dream.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Stevenson didn't write anything remotely like Jekyll and Hyde afterwards.
Yeah.
I mean, he burnt the early draft, didn't he? His wife didn't like the look of it, so he burnt it. Started again. Bloody hell. I'm going, he couldn't have done. He couldn't, he'd have hidden it under the carpet and just pretended to have burnt it. I'm sure it's out there. A writer cannot burn a manuscript, can they? I know, I think it's out there somewhere.
Spark's got a story about that. Well, it's not the writer, it's his children,
Yeah.
you know, afterwards burning. And anyway, it's too difficult to talk about. I've been wanting to ask you for it since you donated the archive. There's a scene in Dead Souls which reminded me of The Comforters by Spark. Simply in the back room of the Oxford bar, Rebus is talking to a writer who recommends books to him. And one can't help but wonder whether you are that writer.
No, the writer in the back room of the Oxford bar, I can tell you, is a guy called Hayden Murphy.
Right.
Hayden is an Irish Times journalist who has been drinking the Oxford bar since before I did. And he sits at the same table in the back room and he gets his newspaper. He reads about 3 or 4 newspapers a day. He sits with a pint. And yeah, in any of the Rebus books, if there's a writer in the room, it's not me, it's him.
Right, okay.
So
you didn't go for a sparky and kind of bright.
No. I mean, Spark, the playfulness of Spark, I think creeps into my books.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of wordplay, the puzzles, names.
Yeah.
I mean, the very name Rebus, which means puzzle.
Uh-huh.
You look at some of Spark's books and you look at the names she gives characters. She's having some fun. And allowing the reader to have some fun as well. So I think I take all that from her. I think I only met her once and she was kind of tired and a bit frail. I would love to have met her in her heyday.
Yeah.
You know, when she was hanging out with, what's her name? Patricia Highsmith in Italy. And look at, I just had to review. Somebody said to me about a year ago, do you want to review Patricia Highsmith's diaries? And I went, yeah, okay, I've got nothing else to do. It was 1,000 pages. 1,000 pages. I thought, oh God. So I trawled through them. But there's a mention of Spark. There's not much about Spark, but there's a couple of mentions about her giving Muriel her cats or dogs to look after. Yeah. And she used to smuggle snails in her bra across borders. She collected snails. And there's that scene in Hot House by the East River where the Countess has larvae in her chest of, I don't know, butterflies or moths or something. And that's where that's come from. That's come from something that she actually experienced in real life.
And your introduction drew quite heavily on what you'd done in your PhD for your introduction for the Hot House.
Yeah, I mean, when I did my PhD on Muriel Spark, which I did in this very august establishment upstairs with my wee index cards and everything, there was a writer in residence at the uni called Alan Massey. God bless him, he was a big help to me and a supporter in my early days. He gave me Muriel Spark's address in Rome, but I never dared write to her. But what was I going to say about him? I was going to say something, and I forgot what it was. What were you saying? Take me back.
You had written the introduction to the re-editions of the Hot House.
So when Hot House by the East River was reissued by Polygon and they asked me to do an introduction to it, when Alan Massey read it and he said, well, Ian, you've made more sense of that frustrating book than I ever could. Because he wrote one of the very first books about Spark. Nice short book. So he was a big help to me when I was doing my PhD.
And hugely complimentary of your writing as well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in fact, he introduced me to my first publisher. Right. So the Rebus novels first Rebus novel, Noughts and Crosses, was sent to, I think, 8, the letter's in the archive, 8 publishers. My agent sent it to 8 publishers, maybe 9 because she Tipp-Ex'd one out. I think it was Canongate, and she just was so embarrassed that Canongate had turned it down that she Tipp-Ex'd it out. She sent it to all London publishers, and the only one who came back was Ewan Cameron, who was an editor at Bodley Head. And Ewan Cameron was a friend of Alan Massey's. Alan Massey was published by Bodley Head, and so I'd met him a few times. And maybe that's why I thought I'm going to take a punt on this guy. And latterly, Bodley Head also published Muriel Spark. So it was like a nice synergy there. I loved that little synergy. And I remember taking the night bus down to London, because that's all I could afford, for a meeting with my editor. And I thought, I'm going to walk into this building, Bodley Head, in Bloomsbury, and Muriel Spark will be sitting waiting to see her editor, and Graham Greene will be sitting waiting to see his editor. No, none of that. No, it was a real letdown, actually. It was a real letdown. But no, it was great. It was great.
Before we talk about your the Rankin Files display next door, I wanted to come back to something we touched on earlier. You're talking about Spark, and she's perceived clearly as literary fiction, and throughout the archive, you can make really passionate claims for the fact that the best of crime writing is literary fiction. It should be thought of as such. It seems like there's a move towards that, or there has been.
Yeah.
Is that the sense that you get, and where, excuse me, where do you see yourself?
I mean, that's definitely a sense I get. I was in St Andrews last Saturday doing a talk and signing books, and I bumped into a woman who teaches at St Andrews University called Jill Plain, who wrote the first book about my book. She wrote a slim volume about Black and Blue, and she's now working on Agatha Christie. And she is going to be, the guy who worked in the bookshop is a postgraduate student, and he's doing work on the crime novel, the Golden Age crime novel, and she's going to be his director of studies. So, when I told you this story earlier, but I'm going to tell you this. When I was 17, 1977, Cowdenbeath High School, we got to go for a day here and there to see if there was any universities we fancied applying to. And I went to Stirling, but we just got pissed. We didn't really go to Stirling. We walked into town and just got absolutely hammered. But I went to St Andrews, and there was this big bearded guy there, very Oxbridge, wearing a cape. A fucking cape. and he was English literature guy. And I said, what modern fiction could I hope to study here at St Andrews? And he said, Milton. And he wasn't joking. And we've moved from, in 1977, Milton being as modern as you got, to now being able to study a PhD in the crime novel at St Andrews University. So obviously things have changed radically. I mean, I get questions occasionally from people that are doing their M.Lit or their PhD or whatever, or maybe doing a school essay, high school essay on my books. So yeah, things have changed. And I think that's, I mean, possibly there's less snobbishness around than there used to be. Possibly younger crime writers are writing more literary novels. I think a generation of writers who, a couple of generations ago, would have wanted to be seen as literary novelists, now see no shame in being seen as crime writers. And as Alan Massey said to me when I wrote my first crime novel, he said, well, you might never get the literary kudos, but you'll make some cash. Now, the cash was slow to come, but it turned out he was right. And I mean, literary fiction makes no money at all for anybody. I think the money you get for a first novel now is what you got in 1986 when I was first published. So crime fiction has now got writers writing it who once upon a time would have been literary writers. And so they bring a literary sheen or a literary mentality to the books.
One of the notes that we have on display through in the exhibition, you say, I think this is in the mid-90s, you're saying, I would still opt for critical appreciation, literary appreciation over financial success. When I'm dead, I want my work to be studied in Scottish institutions. I don't want £1 million now and oblivion later. How do you feel about the fact that you have the critical appreciation, you have the literary appreciation, financial success, and your work's now being studied in Scottish institutions?
No, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good haul. I'm happy with that.
Good.
What can I tell you? I'm happier with that than if it hadn't happened.
Yeah.
I was in a, sometimes in 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, I went to some pretty dark places and never thought success would come. I mean, if it was the early 90s, I would have been living in France, and we'd gone from my wife and I living in London, having 2 jobs, to living in France and being completely needing, the only money we had was what I got from writing books, and that wasn't much. And so I was the sole breadwinner. And that was really tough. I was having panic attacks. I was thinking, please don't drop me. My publishers were always on the verge of dropping me because my book sales weren't good enough. I was writing 2 books a year just to make enough money to survive. I was doing the Jack Harveys as well as the Rebus books, because nobody wanted 2 Rebus novels a year. They couldn't sell them. They would take them now. But all of that was going on, and that's possibly, I was like, it was pretty tough for the first few years. And France, why did France? Well, right, I couldn't speak any French. I mean, I couldn't speak French. I managed to go down to the baker's one day and say my wife was ancient, not pregnant. Ancien, not enceinte. We couldn't afford to anybody to do the house up, so we had to do it all ourselves. We rewired the house and then had to wear a pair of oven gloves to open the fridge, because otherwise you got an electric shock. the number of times I nearly died chainsawing through a Wellington boot or nearly fallen off a ladder. I fell off ladders many times from high places. It was just nuts that we did that. Nuts. But weirdly, and you're going to get access to this, weirdly, I just got an email yesterday that was sent to my publisher from somebody who now owns that house. It's been through about 2 or 3 or 4 different owners since we lived there. We left in 1996. And they sent a photograph and they said, we just found this in the attic. And it's a pile of floppy disks from an Amstrad. So they're quite hard, chunky little floppy disks. And they've got things written in them like, what did I say? They've got one of the Jack Harvey novels is there. And Rebus on BBC. So there must have been a BBC interest in Rebus at that time. Something on Spark, I don't know what that would have been. Maybe I was still doing my PhD then. I can't think I was. I think I'd given up on it by that stage. But I'm going to get them to send me them, and I shall obviously see if you want them. But I don't think we can strip anything out of them, and I don't think there'll be anything to strip. I mean, this stuff corrupts. Like when I was going through all my archive to give it to the National Library, I had sheets of shiny fax paper. Remember, fax paper came in a shiny roll. It was just blank. These faxes had just faded away to nothing. So I thought, well, that's just going in the bin then, you know. So, and it's the same with these little Amstrad floppy disks. It's hard. You'd have to really work hard to get information off them. If it hadn't been corrupted, having sat in an attic since 1996.
And would that be the same attic when your first editions were nested in by mice?
Yeah. Yeah, when we were moving back to Edinburgh, I went up and had boxes of Nuts and Crosses first edition, boxes and boxes, because they hadn't sold. And when I opened them up, mice had made a nest in them. And I mean, now they're worth hundreds of pounds a pop. And in fact, I did throw them out. I thought, this is minging, because it was all mouse pee and droppings and that. And then some collector or some rare book dealer said, oh no, they would have been, you could have got some money for them.
I once got offered a bar of chocolate that had been nibbled by mice at one end. My boss said, oh, you can have that. Anyway,
you could have had the other end.
True. It wasn't a very big bar.
It's a thought that counts.
Yes. One of the other things that we've got on display next door is, you've touched on it already, the kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing, almost as it applies to you. And at one point you're saying the Rebus books are all misfires, and then on the very next page you're saying, listen to me, I think I'm the most important crime writer in the world. It's kind of like you give yourself a really hard time, and it's like you need to build your confidence up, and it's...
Well, I mean, these notes were never meant for public consumption.
Yeah.
I mean, when I wrote them, I was writing for me. I'd always kept a diary, and I didn't give you the diaries. So from the age of 12 till I was 30, I kept a page-a-day diary. And it's just a way of, it's cathartic. It's a way of channeling all that dark stuff out. And it's the same with writing books. I think writing books has saved me a fortune in psychoanalyst fees, really, because I give all the dark stuff to Rebus. So anything that happens in my life that's not good, I can just channel it to him.
Yeah. I mean, I was surprised when we said to you, do you mind if we put some of these wee notes up?
I don't mind now.
Exhibition.
I don't mind now. I mean, I don't mind. I mean, I don't, my mental health was never such that I thought I was in danger of losing it. It was just that I would occasionally go for a drive through the empty countryside in France and scream. Because I just panic attacks, you get this adrenaline just surging through you, and you have a way of getting rid of it. And I would just go and scream. My wife suggested breathing in a paper bag, but that's not quite as cathartic. It's just screaming at the world.
I read, we've got the manuscript of Summer Rights, which obviously was your first novel but never published. And you're quoted as saying that Miranda said that's...
Miranda said it's my best book, yeah. I don't know if she's joking or not. I mean, she read it. It was never published, no. I sent it to... I didn't send it to many places, but I did send it to Galanx Publishing. And I got a nice letter back from Livia Galanx saying, first 2/3 of this are okay, last third needs a lot of work. And I thought, what does she know? I've written a great Scottish novel here and she just doesn't realise it. Well, it was never published. I just put it in the bottom drawer and it disappeared for years. And then I opened a trunk, Miranda's dad's trunk, and I opened it up and no, there it was, when we moved back from France. So I honestly, because I never photocopied it, I couldn't afford to photocopy it. It's just a typescript. But yeah, she did. She used to say that was her favourite book of mine. Right. Best book, I'm not so sure.
Do you... Yeah.
I'm going to check the time. 18:23. We've been going a long time. We need to open up for questions, you know that.
do, Kenny. We've got a couple of minutes. We've got a couple of minutes before you can. Your last novel was in the Times. The review in the Times said that only great novels capture the spirit of the age. This is one of them. In the material that's on display, you talk about how you would think of acclaim and what you would like to be acclaimed for. But given that you're now successful, given that you are being taught, I'm interested to know what are the most important benchmarks for you of success? Because from the outside, you're successful in all manner of different ways. What are the ways that are mean the most to you for quantifying?
Well, I mean, if you've always wanted to be a writer, it's nice when people are reading your books. And the more people that are reading your books, the better you feel. You've written something worthwhile. And I mean, you can sell not many copies and still be a great writer and still be successful in that you're writing great books. But I quite like selling lots of books. And that tends to put food on the table. Having spent many years not putting much food on the table, it's nice when you finally can. And I mean, coming from my background, sort of, my parents weren't readers. They didn't read much. My sister didn't. She read Agatha Christie. Now I think about it, I tried reading those when I was wee, but I didn't like them. But no, it wasn't a very literate family. And I was I was a kind of weirdo who liked to read and who went off to uni to do English. Despite my parents, they wanted me to do accountancy because then I could get a good job. And I said, I don't want a good job, I want to study English. What will you do after when you finish? Teach. All right. I just thought that's what I would do. I would teach at Beath High School, and I would write poetry and lovely short stories that might get published occasionally. That was my kind of trajectory. I never wanted to be a crime writer. That came about by accident. And it took, I had the support of a good woman, which was really important, to have family and friends and a spouse who really, think you're doing, keep going, don't give up. When you're not selling well and you're not making money, you're getting rejections. So yeah, I think, success is a difficult thing. See, when I got the knighthood, it happened with the OBE as well. My wife thought, you'll turn that down. And I went, I'm not turning that down. There's not too many writers from Cardenden, from working class background that have got knighthoods. And in fact, I look back, because I'm anal, I look back, and the last Scottish novelist to get a knighthood was Compton Mackenzie, which was in 1961. And probably before that, it might have been Conan Doyle. I don't know. So I thought, yeah, I'm having that. And then I phoned my sister up, who lives in Perth, and I said, I've been offered a knighthood. And she went, oh, aye. She said, well, just remember, you're still my wee brother. So you're grounded, you're Scottish working class, straight away you're grounded again.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I know. And when I went in the Oxford Bar after it had been announced in the papers, they went, where's your horse? I know. I've had hee-haw from it so far. That's not true. I told you I got one upgrade. I got a hotel upgrade in Dublin, a Republic, which I think was down to the knighthood. I don't know.
The story goes to W.B. Yeats, when he was found out in the middle of the night that he'd won the Nobel Prize. He said, oh, great, how much?
Aye. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah. Just, are we going to questions now? One more question, says Kenny. We've already placed your archives on the shelves downstairs. If it was up to you, which writers from anywhere would you be placed next to on those shelves?
I think you've done it, because I got access to the vaults, and I got to see the frontispieces from Lanark, which you've got. So Alistair Gray's there. You've got McIlvanney. So got McIlvanney. You've got Spark. You've got Alistair Gray. I'm pretty happy with that, to be honest with you. Yeah. The McIlvanney. He was a huge influence. Huge influence. And possibly is the reason that I started writing crime fiction, because he was a literary novelist who wrote crime fiction. He just turned his hand to it for a few books, then gave up and moved on to other things. So yeah, I'm very happy to be next to him.
Were you trepidatious when The Dark Remains was being?
Oh. Well, the first thing he said to me was, look, we've found, his widow has sent us a bunch of manuscript pages of a book he was working towards writing. Can you take a look at them? And then I went, okay, I'll take a look. And then I said, yeah, you could probably get a slim book out of this if you do X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, Siobhan, his widow would like you to have a go. And I said, Glasgow in 1972, McIlvanney's style, which is very different from my style. This isn't my manner, really. I said, I'll give it a go, but I've got to feel free to walk away if it's not working. And it did work. It did work. I don't know. I mean, I did what needed to be done, and she read the book, and she said she wrote a nice handwritten letter to me, and she said, "Oh, Ian, you gave him back to me. You gave him back to me for the weekend that I read that book. It was like he was sitting next to me, and I couldn't see the join. I couldn't see where it stopped being Willie and started to be you. So I thought, well, that job done, job done. And that was a homage, really. Yeah, a necessary homage.
Well, yeah, I guess yeah. Peers saying that your writing's great must be an enjoyable thing. Obviously, Willie's widow. Because in the archive there's lots of letters from other brilliant writers who are saying, I've read your latest, it's fantastic. And
yeah.
Yeah.
No, you've got plenty of stuff. You've got good publishers' archives.
Yep.
Oh, I've not seen even a quarter of it. Right.
Now, do we have questions either from online or from in the audience? We're going to take a minute and get a microphone on the go so that if anyone here... Kenny's got it.
What is that? I thought maybe I bought the booze there for a minute.
It's okay, just not as fast as I used to be.
Do we have, Petra, do we have any questions from
I would
anyone?
think I've answered everybody's
Nope,
questions.
okay.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
a guy in the front row.
Yes, we've got a question down here.
You're all thinking I can go and get some chips.
Thanks very much. I know you were talking about your research in essence that you know ex-policemen and so on. Watched an interesting two-parter that was on TV the other night about the ice cream wars, and there was another author, journalist, Doug Skelton, who had spoken to both sides, as it were, to understand the background about the story. So where do you hang out with the gangsters and baddies?
I tend not to hang out with gangsters and baddies, which is a great relief to me. I just make them up. But there are plenty of true crime books out there, and plenty of journalists that I can talk to if I need information on them. I mean, Cafferty is really a Glasgow gangster. I mean, there has never been an Edinburgh equivalent of Cafferty. There's some small-time players, but nothing as big as him. But the kind of old-school Glasgow gangsters, that's where he comes from. And in fact, his first appearance in the Rebus novels, he is a Glasgow gangster. Book 3, Rebus is given evidence against him in a Glasgow courtroom. And when I brought him back a few books later, I forgot that. And I made him an Edinburgh gangster. So he's got two completely different backstories, depending on which book you read. I just left that in because, Ian, you're an idiot. Let everybody see that. But yeah, and there was another thing recently. There was the World's End Murders. There was a documentary about that. And I mean, these stories are fascinating, but I think we've always got to be very careful that we're not sensationalising it. One of my favourite books of recent years, I think, was called The Five, and Hallie Rubenfeld. And what she'd done was she had written this non-fiction book, extraordinarily detailed, about the victims of Jack the Ripper. And Jack the Ripper is never mentioned in the book. It's about these women's lives, and she gives them substance. And it turns out none of them were prostitutes. You know, this kind of old thing we always see them on films and that. No. So yeah, I think crime writers nowadays are much. We try not to sensationalise the bad boys, the gangsters, and we try and give the victims their place, their proper place, and not just the old cliche of TV cop shows, meet on the slab, in the pathology lab. Actually get back to the kind of story of who this person was. So yeah, no, I don't hang out with gangsters. I did almost what I shouldn't tell us. He might be watching. There was a Glasgow gangster who got out of jail in London, and he was asked by a journalist what he was going to do, and he said, "I'm going to write novels, and I'm going to go and see Ian Rankin so he can give me some tips." And he never found me. But he did write. His name's Gordon Ferris, Paul Ferris, and he did write a few books, but he never did find me.
Do we have any other questions? We've got a question here from the leader.
Hi Ian, in the exhibition there's a wee thing from one of your journals that says maybe I'm just a comic book writer, and I know that you did used to write comic books when you were young, didn't you? But is that something that you've ever thought about doing after you finish your contract here? Would it be something that you would delve into?
I mean, I've done a couple of comics, real comics. I mean, when I was a kid I tried to do them. I got bits of paper and folded them in half and made wee booklets and did wee stick people and had put free gifts on the front. You know, I went the whole hog. And there were limited editions of one, which I only ever showed to my mum. Very good, hand it back. But then years later I got asked if I wanted to do a comic, and I did it, and it was challenging. It's a very different way of telling a story, a very different way of preparing a story. It's almost like more like scripting a film than anything else. And you are in the hands of the artist. The artist is doing a lot of the work on your behalf. But I've done a few. I mean, would I do it again? Oh, I don't know. They've never asked. Let's put it that way. Once I did that one, they never asked me back. So maybe that tells you all you need to know about my life as a comic book writer.
Do you have any more questions?
That's good. We're making Kenny work.
I'm sure you get this question all the time. We're all in the Napier MA in creative writing, genre fiction. It's really good. But would you have any tips for us as people that are just trying to write 3,000-word stories and write critical self-reflections, just getting through the program, and then how do we get started?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I've not really taught creative writing very much because it is very hard. I mean, it's a skill, but it's also a gift. It's a combination of the two. And what I would say is, if you possibly can, try and forget you're actually doing a course, and try and get back to the teenage you sitting in your room just imagining stuff up, just imagining the things into being, and think of the power of that. 26 letters of the alphabet, and you can write a sentence that's never been written before. We all could. Isn't that extraordinary? It's extraordinary. And you've got to have self-belief, of course, but you're going to get knockbacks, so you've got to get a thick skin. You've got to get lucky, which is something nobody really talks about. I mean, you know, me having a relationship with Alan Massey, him introducing me to his editor, was luck. Or some might say nepotism. I would say luck. And just keep writing, keep reading and keep writing. And at first you'll maybe be mimicking styles, and then you'll start to find your own style coming through. You've got to find a story that is your story, that nobody's done before. And then you've got to find a way to tell it that's not been done before. Quite hard. It is quite hard. And like I say, once years ago, I was a visiting professor of creative writing at East Anglia, University of East Anglia, only because it was the first ever creative writing course in the UK, and the very first and only student was Ian McEwan. A year later, they got Kazuo Ishiguro, so it's got quite a. And they're doing a postgraduate crime writing course, and I think 3 of the writers have come out now as published writers. Harriet Tice is possibly the best known. She's in the charts just now with her paperback. An Edinburgh girl, she grew up in Edinburgh. Blood Orange was her first book. She was a student there. Elizabeth McNeill, another Edinburgh writer, but she lives in London. The Doll Factory, she came out of that programme. It's all down to me, obviously. But I said, you know, I don't know how to do it. I never, if I thought about how, it's like riding a bike or swimming. If you start thinking about it, you can't do it anymore. You'll fall off or you'll drown. I just got on and do it. But then everybody's different. I mean, I've always been a fast writer, and I've always just made stuff up. Planners and pantsers. I fly by the seat of my pants. That doesn't do too well in a university course. You know, I'm just going to make this stuff up and not tell you how I did it. And that's what I do. That's what I do. Minimum of research, maximum of flying by the seat of your pants. But do try and have some fun. It should be fun. It should be fun.
I think we've got a question, our last question from online. Petra, do you have that for us?
I do, yes. Ian, can you please tell us a bit more about how you develop the plot, since you tend to write without using a plan?
How I develop what?
How you develop the plot.
The plot? Oh, geez, how do you develop the plot? Make it up. I just make it up as I go along. I don't develop it, I just make it up. When I start a book, I usually know as little as the cops. There's a crime scene, there's a murder, and the cops arrive very early on. And I go, I'm looking over their shoulder going, okay, what are you going to find here? And there's certain things that you would expect them to do. Who's the victim? Let's go and talk to the family. Let's talk to the workmates. Is there any CCTV to be gathered? Let's look at their mobile phone records. Did they have any enemies, etc., etc. Let's do the post-mortem. Let's see if that gives us anything. And I'm just watching them do this, and it starts throwing up information. And I go, oh, that's interesting. That person who's their old friend from school, quite an interesting character. Their spouse, who's a heavy drinker, interesting character. And this story, it seems to me the story has a place that it wants to go. And it might not be where I think it's going to go. A number of times I've thought I knew who the killer was, and it turns out not to be them. It's extraordinary. I've had people die on me that I didn't want to die. One of the Rebus novels had an MSP in it, and he was going to be in the next 3 books. Going to be 3 books about the Scottish Parliament. He was dead 50 pages into book 1. I didn't know who killed him, it was just an extra corpse. By the time we get 2/3 of the way through the first draft, the light bulb starts to go on over the head. You go, oh, hang on a minute, you were the person in the hotel, you're the person who did that, you're covering this up, it's you. But it's a high wire act, but it works for me, but it doesn't mean to say it would work for anybody else, which is why it's a hard thing to teach, because it's different for everybody. I get asked, what kind of word processing software do you use? What kind of pens do you use? Bic. Buy them in packs of 20 from the post office. I've not really, I've said this, but I don't really think about it too much. The story knows where it wants to go, and it takes me there, if I just trust it enough.
That's absolutely fascinating. I wish we had more time, because I'd really love to hear more about that. Because especially the end of the novel, whether that was there at the beginning or whether... Anyway, sorry. We're out of time, folks. It's been an absolute pleasure having Ian. Always great to have you here and to just have the chance to hear about your take on the books and your approach to writing. We're having Ian sign some copies of books outside. So you're getting a deal, because this usually retails at 22 quid, but you're getting them for £17, and Ian has very kindly said he will sign some copies. So those of you who haven't already got a copy, now is your chance. And please, can we just thank Ian for what's been a wonderful, enjoyable event. Thank you.